Good morning to one and all. A warm welcome to all the guests and delegates, both present at the venue and those who have joined virtually to the 6-day international online faculty development program titled Promoting Quality Culture for Quality Enhancement, a Quality Assurance Measure, organized by IQAC, Jyotinivas College Autonomous. Jyotinivas College Autonomous, a premier institution for women, strives to instill quality culture and innovative methods in all spheres of functioning, and we hope for a fruitful experience for all the participants who have joined for this program. Everything is extraordinary in the path illuminated by the light of knowledge. I now invite our principal, Dr. Sister Lalita Thomas, vice principals, Dr. Lalita Raman and Dr. Seethavi, IQSC coordinator, Dr. Carol Stanley, and program coordinator, Dr. Rama Raju, for the lighting of the lamp. It will be followed by a prayer by Miss Mary DeCruz. Let us bow down in prayer. God of the universe, author of life, I thank you for all the blessings showered on us. Today, I place before your holy presence the sessions, the resource persons, the management, the principal, and each one of us. Lord, we know that you are the fountain of all knowledge. Enlighten us so that we understand and engage meaningfully in these discussions. Let all that we do today and every day be for the greater good of the world. Our principal, Dr. Sister Lalita Thomas, is an able leader who always motivates the faculty members and students to pursue quality research. Under her guidance, we now envision great horizons in terms of research and holistic development. I now invite our principal to deliver the welcome address.
Good morning, dear friends. Good morning, dear friends. Thank you. I'm happy this morning to greet you offline in St. Joseph's Auditorium, Jyotinivas College Autonomous. Also greet all our participants who are connected with us virtually. According to the program coordinator, Dr. Rama said, from 10 states and 4 countries, people have logged in for this faculty development program. First and foremost, I must appreciate the IQAC of Jyotinivas College Autonomous, Dr. Carol, the coordinator, and the program coordinator, Dr. Rama. She has taken a lot of trouble organizing contacting, planning for this 6 days FTP along with her committee members. Let us give a big round of applause for all the hard work that has gone in. Congratulations to IQAC Jyotirmoy College Autonomous. I think they are doing the right thing. That is the objective of the IQAC, to enhance and assuring quality throughout the academic year. And they have rightly done that. First, I want to tell you, and I'm prompted to tell you that as we begin this 6 days faculty development program, we must become grateful for what we are called to be. Each one of us seated here in this auditorium and all who are connected virtually, what a great task entrusted on us as teachers. So let us tell ourselves that we are on to a great task of not only transforming ourselves, but also transforming the students. Every day we meet hundreds of students, isn't it? And over the years, thousands of students have gone through our hands. Let us thank God for this great blessing of encountering young people of our time over these years in our respective institutes. The more we become grateful, the more we become relevant. And FTP is meant to help us to develop ourselves, to fine-tune our human potential so that we are in a position to enable our students to fine-tune their potential for, as we know, communion, service, relevance, excellence. So all that we do is to excel. And what we excel must be relevant. And all that is relevant is going to serve the human race. So let us keep that in mind. And this morning, very specifically, I was inspired by the poem Drinking from the Saucer. Have you read this poem? Usually all of us, I don't know how many of you have done that, when the tea or coffee is hot, we pour it onto a saucer and then we drink from it, isn't it? And I've seen my father doing that, older people doing that. I myself have done when I was in a hurry to go, so I would do that. But then when I read this poem, my whole understanding of drinking from the saucer changed. This poem invoked in me a sense of gratitude for all that is being around me, in me, and all that I am receiving. I wish you get to read this poem, Drinking from the Saucer, okay? So it is something that is overflowing. When we start thanking God for everything that we have, you have so much to thank, it overflows. So I simply loved this poem. I said this will suit you today because I hope this FTP will help you to fill your wisdom tank. So which means filling your wisdom tank has to overflow to reach out to everyone that you are going to interact. And this listening through this FTP also, I hope, will prompt you to engage in conversation with your colleagues, with your friends, and with your students, all that you would learn during these 6 days. FTP again also is a reminder for us to become students. Also, it's a reminder for us that we have to continue to learn. And it is also a reminder for us what is a life of a student again. So as we sit through these 6 days of FTP, you will also learn to be a student, to listen, and also to internalize all that you listen and that which is relevant for us today. To conclude, I want to say, I love this poem, Drinking from the Saucer, from the perspective of how we need to overflow, which means we need to really keep ourselves updating. At the same time, to learn, our cup needs to be also empty. So keep your mind, your heart open to all that is going to be happening during these 6 days. We have good speakers, resource persons. I'm sure they're going to make an impact on us and they in turn are going to be impactful teachers. Thank you and God bless us as we keep our light shining. All the best for the organizing team and good, enjoyable learning time for all of us.
Thank you, sister, for your inspiring words. Indeed, we would strive to keep our wisdom tanks full and overflowing. I now call upon Ms. Suparna Sen Gupta to give an overview of the program. Good morning. Quality enhancement assurance. The three key words in this week's faculty development program sets the tone and temper for the objectives and outcomes of IQAC as an institutional body. Education in today's world is a wide spectrum project. On one end of this project is the learner's willingness to think for oneself. On the other end is the educator's readiness to adapt themselves towards changing academic needs. Our access to knowledge systems is evolving. So too, our pedagogical approaches must be refashioned. We are fast shifting towards a learner-centric educational system where a uniform template for imparting education is no longer viable. Learner skills, areas of interest, and their socio-cultural environment are some of the parameters against which today's academic contexts can be assessed. This requires a reorientation of our teaching approaches, curriculum structures, and evaluative processes. The IQAC of Jyotirvas College Autonomous diligently promotes excellence in all spheres of institutional functioning. It has been instrumental in developing a learner-centric campus culture. Through continual academic deliberations, in research and collaborations, the IQAC is committed to upholding quality parameters. It is a necessity not only for learners to forge new thoughts and opportunities for themselves, it is also the educator's mode of expanding their own potential. IQAC stands at the forefront of enforcing these changes. We need to imagine an ecosystem, ways of institutional functioning, whereby we can observe, reflect, challenge, investigate, innovate. Over the next 6 days, we will engage with domain experts who will share their insights on various aspects of an educational institution's role, from curriculum design and evaluation to campus culture. There is an entire compass of topics to be covered. Our responsibility lies in understanding these roles and integrate concerns of ethics, equity, accessibility, and outcome-based methods with modern-day education. Only then, academic research and social welfare can complement one another. Wishing everyone a fruitful engagement over the next few days. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Suparna, for that comprehensive overview. I now call upon Ms. Paramita Sen to introduce our chief guest.
It is with great pleasure and honor I take this opportunity to introduce to you Professor Yashwant Dongre, our chief guest for the day. Dr. Dongre has served as Professor of Commerce and the Director of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation Board at the University of Mysore, India. Professor Dongre has handled many research projects funded by both national and international organizations such as Ford Foundation, University of Technology, Sydney, and Asia Pacific Philanthropy Consortium, Philippines. He also has, to his credit, more than 100 publications in various journals and magazines. Professor Dongre has held many administrative positions, which include Registrar of the University and Vice Chancellor of the University. Dr. Dongre is also a consultant to the high-powered Committee on Cooperatives set by the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India, and serves as the co-secretary of the ICA-AP Committee on Cooperatives in Educational Institutions. Professor Dongre has been involved in various training and consultancy assignments in the field of cooperatives and has provided numerous extension activities in the same field. Professor Yashwant Dongre is currently serving as the Vice Chancellor of Chanakya University, Bengaluru. Sir, we are indeed very happy to have you with us today. May I now request you to kindly address our participants of the FDP.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this very important program which we have you have conceived. I'm also very happy that you have chosen a right person to give the keynote today. I think I call Chetan Singh as a young veteran, who is young by age but veteran in terms of his experience of issues related to higher education. I would essentially focus on just a couple of things related to the higher education domain and the need for focus on quality. I am now part of a new university, a startup university, for that matter, a greenfield startup, though we call it a startup on a fast track. Whereas your institution is a well-established autonomous college. But I think still we have something in common, that we both belong to the domain of higher education. And I think we both have to essentially focus on the quality of education that we deliver. In today's competitive setting, where I think universities and higher education institutions are in a high-pitched competitive mode, there is, I think, no compromise that is possible in terms of quality. Of course, we have been talking about issues of quality, access, and equity for quite some time now. Access and equity are very much important, especially in a setting like ours, a country like ours. But even when we focus so much on access and equity, we cannot compromise on quality. In our university, for example, a new university that is yet to really take off, right from day one, we are focusing on what we call as developing young people into a holistic personality, essentially of making them into transformative leaders. So we ask ourselves the question, if we have to do that, what is it that we have to do in terms of what we give to the young people? Okay. So obviously, the central thing that comes is quality. How qualitative are we would make us, how distinct are we in the field of higher education. There is no point now for us to be one of the many kind of institutions for anybody, any one of us, unless we stand out and unless we prove that we are one of the best. As an institution, survival becomes difficult, and also the purpose of higher education will not be served. Therefore, I congratulate you on this focus on quality enhancement. I think every higher education institutions need to do that. The focus on quality of higher education also has a fairly long history. I mean, the talk about this has started almost like, 2 decades ago. In the later part of the 90s, there was on the one hand UNESCO. As you know, UNESCO has been conventionally a global institution that is focused on education. So UNESCO came out with its own doctrines, its own models of how educational institutions can enhance quality, right? And around the same time, in the last year of the 90s, I think 1999, European countries came out with what they call as the Bologna Declaration, right? That's again focused on quality of higher education. Now, ever since that, in the last 2-3 decades, there has been a lot of focus on this. In our country, in particular, after the National Education Policy 2020 is put in place, there have been a lot of efforts from the apex bodies of higher education towards quality enhancement. Not that it was not there earlier, but now there is a special focus on that. I think just last year, UGC came out with its higher education quality mandate. There have been a couple of publications. I'm sure many of you, those who are involved in IQAC and others would have seen this, that UGC has developed its own framework, what we call as a quality mandate. And it's very much essential for all of us today to internalize the quality mandate and proceed with that. Now, theoretically, when we look at the essence of quality, we find that quality is something that is embedded into the culture of the organization. Okay, so which means we say that organizational culture and the quality of the output have a one-to-one relationship. In other words, what we need to do in the process of or in our pursuit of quality education is essentially to look internally and look at our own organizational culture and strengthen, build our organizational culture. In fact, the institutional development plan propagated by the new education policy or the national education policy gives us a very good framework to really put in place different processes that are aimed towards building a good organizational culture. Obviously, organizational culture, the moment we talk about organizational culture, a set of things would come to our mind. There is something called the value systems. There is something called the commitment. There is something called our the autonomy or the academic freedom that one enjoys. And there is also something called the learner, or focusing on the learner. Now, what is this ecosystem that we develop in an educational institution that will eventually lead to better quality? Quality, of course, is by itself a qualitative term. It's many times very difficult to explain quality on a typical quantitative parameter, though of course we have some of the indicators. When you go for accreditation or ranking or something like that, a lot of quality related issues are converted and measured. It will have to be, of course, our quality will have to be measurable in some sense. Otherwise, we cannot communicate ourselves well enough. So when we do that, when we put that kind of a system in place, we'll have to look at the parameters that will decide the quality. For example, if we talk about a value system within an organization should be the one that focuses on bringing everybody into a common line of thinking. Okay, so we all fall in line in terms of a particular line of thinking. And when we do that, to that extent, it will be easier for us to pursue our goal of really delivering, qualitative output. Sometimes it gets expressed in highly measurable parameters. For example, you have a comparison that you can make as an institution vis-a-vis other institutions and say, where do you stand in terms of quality? Sometimes you can make use of the public perception. How do people see? How do your clientele group actually see you? Sometimes you can simply look at ranking and other parameters and compare yourself and where do you stand. These are fine, but essentially, how confident are we as part of an institution and in terms of what we are delivering? If we are convinced that what we are doing is the right thing and what we are giving is really qualitative, a lot of things would be automatically addressed. That's why I would like to underline again and again and say that it's the whole pursuit of building an organizational culture that would eventually lead to quality output. So we need to look internally. We need to address ourselves more and more. We need to have our own tools of comparison within the organization of every individual and every unit, which is aimed to deliver something specific. So it calls for a thorough preparation. I'm very happy that the sessions in your FDP has been very beautifully segregated to give a lot of inputs into what you actually do on a hands-on basis, right? So from the day one after the keynote to the end, you have chosen different things. For example, there is a focus on curriculum development. There is a focus on pedagogy, and so many of those things, which I think is a very good starting point for all of us to understand this process. But then it's also important for us to understand that finally what matters is what do we do with the learner? How far do we address the needs of the learner? What do we make of the learner? What do we make the learner to become? This, I think, is the essence of quality. There have been debates about, debates about measuring the reputation of an institution based on certain parameters, like, for example, campus placement. Now, there's been a big academic debate as to whether 75% placement and 10% of your students becoming entrepreneurs, can you compare, right? Now, which makes you a better institution, whether 100% placement or 10% entrepreneurs? Which one makes you a better institution? There have been entrepreneurial universities emerging today globally. Some universities call themselves entrepreneurial universities, and they say that we want to make our students entrepreneurs. When I say entrepreneur, not only in the business sense, entrepreneur in the sense of making them leaders. Okay. Now, our focus here will have to be, I think, very clear. We need a lot of clarity as to what is it that we want to really deliver in the process of making our young people educated. So this could vary from institutions to institution. And NEP, for example, provides us different kinds of possibilities, like you can be a essentially teaching institution or a research institution. Okay, it also gives a lot of scope for being very innovative and creative in terms of what you do and how you do. There are many universities in India who are coming up now on a canvas of what we call as a liberal education model, where students can do a lot of pick and choose and decide for themselves as to what is it that they want to study. So these things are fast evolving, and therefore, as a higher education institution, we are all in a very, very dynamic marketplace, if I can use that word. Now, when we are in that kind of a dynamic situation, we need to be highly responsive to all changes that take place. Now, if we have to do that, we need to equip ourselves for that. We have to catch up with everything that is happening. We can't turn our back to technology. We can't turn our back to the emerging disciplines. We can't turn our back even to the necessities of physical infrastructure. So everything needs to be addressed simultaneously to really stand out. We are all quite often listening and seeing the phenomena that higher educational institutions of India have not been able to catch up with some of the best in the world, that we are not figuring in so-called top 100, top 200 kind of things. To move towards that, of course, that is not our objective, but still to move towards that, that means to really make ourselves distinct. We have to start rethinking on the model that we have followed all these years, and then put in place totally new concepts of learning and then maybe involve our main stakeholders, involve the young people, the students, in the process of the entire design of what is it that we are going to offer. So if we shift our focus from what we call as the institutional delivered model to the learner required model, then I think we will be moving much faster and quicker towards pursuit of quality. So this is what in general, I think we need to do. All of us as higher education institutions will have to do. Of course, there are specific activities that we need to plan for this, specific processes that we need to follow, and we need to put in place a proper system to realize all these things. I'm sure educational institutions like yours will take the lead in this. Not only that you become such an excellent institution, but you will help other institutions to also grow and become excellent like that. I'm sure this event is going to throw a lot of light on that, and the teachers who are participating, the educational administrators who are participating will gain a lot and will have things to carry back to their institution and put in place to make their institution move towards better quality. I wish this program all success, and thank you once again for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
And thank you for taking us through the different aspects of quality enhancement, which has definitely inspired us to imbibe and continue having a quality educational culture in our organization's ecosystem. I now call upon Dr. Rama Raju to introduce our keynote speaker.
Professor Dongre, sir, good morning. Chetan here.
Very good morning.
Morning, sir.
I can see you. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Dongre. Good morning. I feel privileged to introduce an academician whose achievements and contribution to the field of education is indeed very significant. When I set out to identify and seek resource persons for this FDP, Dr. Chetan Singai's name was recommended by several senior academicians. And so the organizing team thought it befitting for him to be delivering the keynote address. Dr. Chetan Singai has a master's degree in political science from JNU and an MPhil in law and governance from the Center for the Study of Law and Governance, New Delhi. He received the prestigious Erasmus Mundus Scholarship to pursue masters as a joint degree from University of London, University of Aarhus, Denmark, and University of Dosho, Spain. Dr. Chetan Singai has obtained his doctoral degree from the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bengaluru. After having worked as assistant professor at the National Law School of India University and St. Joseph's College, Bengaluru, he has been a visiting faculty at Julius Maximilians University, Würzburg, Germany from 2014 to 2017. Dr. Singai was nominated as a member of the committee and chief consultant to finalize the draft of the National Education Policy 2020. He was associated as member secretary to review the quality mandate relating to the promotion of research and MPhil PhD regulation in India. Dr. Singai has published 2 books and has more than 25 national and international publications in peer-reviewed journals on issues related to higher education. We welcome you, Dr. Singai, to share your views on the theme of our FDP. We thank you also for obliging us with your gracious presence today.
Thank you so much, Professor Rama. With your permission and with the presence of great scholars here and academicians and faculty members and others who have joined from various parts of the world, I believe, as you mentioned to me, Professor Rama. Also, I would like to acknowledge that Professor Vasudha from Sociology Department was the one, I think, also uh, sort of linked me to you, in addition to you acknowledging that other senior academicians suggested that maybe I was the right person to initiate the discussion with the right framework that was set forth by Professor Dongre. So many thanks for your initial introduction. Now I have to live up to that introduction, so I'll try my best to sort of communicate what I would like to share in this context of quality as culture. And I'm, as also Professor Dongre rightly mentioned, I really appreciate the whole approach and the theme, which is long due amongst the academicians to think through that how do we imbibe quality as culture. So let me share my slide. And also, if some of you can come on video, if it is convenient, it will help me to be a little bit more interactive, subject to your convenience. Yeah, am I able to share my slides? Yes. So I am going to align to what the nation is going through right now. That is the implementation of NEP in my little capacity of also engaging with the draft, then the final version, and now the implementation part, or at least the state level. And rightly so, I had a chance to work with Professor Dongre sir on the regulation and governance part, where he was chairing a subcommittee constituted by the Karnataka State Higher Education Council. And now in my limited role as a special officer to State Council to see how it is actually happening on the ground. So with this, I thought it is better to talk through what is being the practice and the larger norm that is being experienced across the nation today. So I thought I will link it to NEP. And again, I'll not belabor too many policy recommendations there for the discussion, but I just want to communicate that a policy of this kind, whether it is 86 policy, 68 policy, or 2020 policy, a policy looks at things in a holistic way. And when we look at things from a holistic way, the three E's, that is expansion, equity, and excellence, are often the points at which the emphasis is sort of made through. At the same time, the emphasis varies, right? In a simple linear way, very difficult to say so, but for the sake of discussion, one can say that in the initial days of post-independence, the emphasis was more on expansion. And then in the 70s and 80s, the emphasis, while the expansion was still important, the emphasis became more on equity. And post-liberalization, gradually, and also due to some internal and external pressures, as they say, or an ecosystem that was evolving, the emphasis, along with expansion equity, moved towards excellence. And I think that is again the right time, maybe appropriately, that we see the National Assessment and Accreditation Council coming, that is in the 1991-92, with thinking started in 89. So Professor Arun Nigwekar, who was the person who led the initiative of the NAC. So today, we are seeing another paradigm shift. The same NAC which came in 92 is also undergoing certain transformation. I'm sure some of you, especially the IQAC team there, might have looked into the recent reforms that have been put forth by the NAC in its recent document, right? So there is a shift happening, and partly the shift is also because of these policy initiatives. And here we have one that is the NEP 2020. So I thought I'll use that lens. But before I get into the aspect of NEP 2020 and its linkages to quality as culture, and let me share one important framework. It's very complicated. Please don't worry to think about it right now. But my idea of that to communicate to you is there's 3 points from this particular slide. Let me see if I can. Yes. So when we talk about quality as culture versus quality as a practice, what are the major challenges and differences? And again, as rightly mentioned, it's always good to speak after a learned scholar, right? A lot of references we can borrow. So very rightly, that is quality to be measured by virtue of those parameters set forth by an agency or entity who is outside our institution, right? So when we talk about NAC, when we talk about NBA, when we talk about NIRF, QS World Ranking, Times Higher Education Ranking, Shanghai Jiaotong Ranking, just name them, there are many. Unfortunately, for us who are in the thick of teaching, research, etc. These parameters don't make directly sort of relevant to us, but the students and the parents who are our other stakeholders are going by these metrics and trying to assess us based on that. So there is this what we call challenge or a barrier that exists out there in higher education. But having said that, another important point from this framework I would like to communicate. I will be happy to share this to you through Professor Rama, and you can also get into more details. But another point I would like to highlight here, these parameters are often emphasizing on input parameters. I'll give one example, and I'm sure you'll have plethora of that in your mind when I share this. The student-teacher ratio or faculty-student ratio, right? So very often we have regulatory authorities saying it has to be 1:20, 1:15, and if you go to an MC, it is 1:7, etc. The National Medical Council and earlier the MCI. It varies. Now, what does that input metric mean to us? And they sort of bring this input metric based on the overarching thought that it will enhance quality of teaching, learning, research, and extension. But does that really happen? Is that the only metric that we should be considering for an act of quality, measure of a quality? That's a larger question for all of us to think through. It's an input metric. Yes, it is. Hence, it is more of a compliance, not necessarily a sort of a culture that is also evolving in a particular institution of higher education. But invariably, we have to follow that. There is, because it's also compliance, as I said, on one hand, and then there is a culture on the other hand. But hence, this framework is nothing but the list of pointers here. So this is a component called input, processes, and output. This is what you call dimension under the component, and each dimension has an element and a sub-element. And these element and sub-elements and dimensions are not new to us. They are sum total of NAAC parameters, sum total of the QS World Ranking, sum total of Times Higher Education, sum total of NBA, sum total of NIRF, right? So this is how the elephant looks like, right? The elephant, which is our problem of this rating ranking, looks like. Now, to just give an example, as I mentioned, our assessment metrics are more aligned to this sort of a box, which is input box, faculty related issues, student related metrics, and resources related metrics. But when it comes to processes, wherein we have research, education, and service, we do have some metric which are definitely to be measured by the rating and ranking accreditation agencies. But again, it is merely quantitative. How many papers you have published, how many projects, what is the total revenue that you have generated through project, what is the total number of collaborations. And the best metric which I always enjoy is number of MOUs, right? Very often they ask. So now my larger question is, what happens after the MOU, right? Is it the memorandum of understanding to ensure that we forget each other, or is it a memorandum of understanding that we work together? That's a bigger question, and I'm sure each one of us had our own experience. So that's a metric. That's the input metric. How many number of MOUs you had? So now my larger question is that how has that translated into action? How has that contributed, and for what it has contributed? Has it contributed to branding? Fair enough. That is also good measure. Has it contributed to advancement of research, advancement of teaching, advancement of students' employability component, etc.? So that is how the shift has to happen from a procedural, process-driven, input-driven aspect to substantive sort of an experience for an institution, which is what gradually leads to a quality as a culture, as an ecosystem in an institution. The other aspect is output, which I was trying to hint through this MOU aspect. Student research and reputation is one way of measuring the output. Now, you have done, as I said, student-teacher ratio, number of MOUs, number of publication, number of classrooms with LCD projector and smart classrooms, etc., etc. Now, that's the input metric, which is important at the same time. I'm not belittling the importance of the need. It is very critical. But how does it translate to processes, and what processes lead to what sort of outcomes, right? So in a way, when you look at these accreditation, rating, and ranking parameters or metrics, they are often siloed. There are some which are focusing on input. There are some which are focusing on processes. There are some which focus on output. I'll give an example, last example to give this framework sort of an concept. QS World Ranking, right, versus Times Higher Education Ranking, which are now the metrics. And unfortunately, we cannot ignore them because they are now determining our policy directions also. So much before the NEP came, there was this policy of QS and Times ranking as a metric or as a benchmark to sort of identify institution of eminence, IOEs, in the country. And now that they're also now used benchmark, now that NIRF is coming in a big way, there is a slight sort of pushback on this world rankings. But anyways, rankings are still a metric. So irrespective, and as I said, students, our primary stakeholders are sort of comparing us through this lens of accreditation, rating, and ranking, right? So QS and Times, for example. See, Times Higher Education gives a lot of weightage on processes, whereas QS, World Ranking, gives a lot of weightage on output in their ranking system, right? But as an institution, if we really have to develop that larger thinking of how do we internalize quality, how do we translate quality into excellence. If we are able to organize our input, process, outputs, and try to do best in all the three and see the linkages from each to other, that would evolve itself what we call institutionalization of culture of quality in a particular institution of higher education. But it is hard. It is easier said than done. And again, please don't let us not look towards the IQAC coordinator to do this, because that is the antithesis to quality as culture. It is supposed to be each one of us doing that in our own way. And then we accumulate that towards the IQAC. I hope Professor Rama will also appreciate that, because generally when we talk about quality, it is always we turn towards the IQAC. But IQAC is just an enabler, is a facilitator. But here, this input, process, output is where each one of us are supposed to engage with, right? So the QS World Ranking gives 40% weightage to global reputation of an institution, right? So they send out a survey of 1,000, 2,000 people or institutions across the globe, and they ask about you. How do they rate Jyoti Niwas College? How do they rate Christ University? How do they rate St. Joseph's College and now University? So that is their sort of perception. So that is where reputation plays an important role amongst the peers. And who are rating? It is the faculty members. It is the administrators in higher education. Whereas Times goes by processes, right? The course design, development, are your course aligned to SDGs, the 17 goals of SDGs, etc. So what I'm trying to communicate here are 3 points to take away, to summarize on this slide. One, when we talk about quality as a process, then it will limit itself to each of this vertical as a silo, not as an horizontal linkage from one vertical to other to the other. Second, we need to move from input-centric quality approach to process and output-driven quality approach at an institutional level. Then we align to those larger metrics that are out there. And then we will anyways then lead up to that. So do you think IISc is bothered about NAAC and NIRF and world ranking? They're not working backwards. They're not keeping that as a direction. They're just doing what they're supposed to do. And they're just contributing to the larger vision. And as a result of that, they're able to contribute to whatever the today's ranking and rating have been positioning them, right? Of course, one can question there are barriers of funding, opportunities, etc. But that is where, as a team, as an institution, we'll have to come together and overcome the, whatever limited we can do with the resources that we have, and also look for opportunities and avenues to generate more resources. And the last point here to draw is that this sort of framework allows us to believe in the fact that it is not just one person, it is not that one team or one coordinator who does quality in a particular institution. It is a sum total of all individuals who are associated, right from the student to the top level, how they are able to contribute to all these parameters, if possible, at least to know where they stand. What are the parameters that you want to think of in short term? What are the parameters that you want to strengthen in midterm? And what are the parameters or criteria that you want to focus for long term? So irrespective of that. So in addition to evolving as an overarching culture that we are talking through. So I hope I communicated those 3 points, but of course, I'm open to discussion also later on if need be. And of course, we can always exchange emails, because I don't want to complicate this framework. This is a paper which has been published. We'll share that to you, but this is just a reference point to communicate the fact that quality is not just one person, one entity, or one set of people. It is a institution as a whole and across input, process, and output. I think I lost the video there, but it was nice to see you there on the other hand. So that's why. Now, what is the context for the title? So one was the overarching context of appreciating the nuances of how quality as a culture is evolving or it should evolve. The other is the context of the policy, right? And I want to use this opportunity or forum to again reiterate and communicate that please don't ignore and bypass the draft National Education Policy 2019 document, which is a thicker document, but definitely half of Harry Potter in a way. So I'm sure you will all appreciate reading that. So please take out time and read the draft National Education Policy. It is available in multiple language also. Otherwise, I'll be happy to share that because that policy document is what gets eventually translated into the actual document, which is a 66-page document. So that is what we are all talking about. But what is the difference? We are not saying A is better than B, but the approach is different because in the draft NEP, there is a lot of rationale for why the recommendation has been made. A lot of examples, as much as even quoting Steve Jobs' statement that much of Macintosh is made of musicians, artisans, and so on and so forth, and then they become engineers. So that is an approach. That is where you link that to the concept of multidisciplinarity, creativity, innovative thinking, etc. And how do we harness that line of thinking? But please read the document. As educationists, I think we need to at least read it to critique it. If not, at least to read it to understand is one definitely, but also read and then look at the continuity of the policy recommendation. Okay, so keeping that in my mind, these are 2 points I wanted to share. That NEP based on the draft NEP is grounded on the principles of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability. These are what you call the founding pillars on which it was sort of built upon, and rightly so because it's a constitutional mandate at the same time, and it also very clearly highlights that there when we talk about quality in education, it cannot be in silos again because quality in higher education is not different from the way we look at quality in school education. And we should not have two different lenses actually. But of course, parameters change, metrics change. But what is important is that quality in higher education is significantly detrimental on the overarching experience that a child has in school education. Because today we are seeing them as two different compartments. Unfortunately, the governance system is also such that we have a secretary of school education, we have a secretary of higher education. Often they don't even see each other. It is almost like the two difficult neighbors staying together. It is very difficult. So it happens. That is how systems are. But now NEP tries to refer to this context that let us look at education as an organic continuum. And as teachers of higher education, we should also reflect upon school experiences of a child who comes to you as adolescent or adult, and how do we link those experiences. And we should also not close ourselves from the school experience. We should also be very much part of that system, maybe spend some time there, go there on a weekend, something like that. So that linkage has to organically evolve. One, policy regulation will evolve. On the other hand, we also have to individually engage because implementation of policy has 4 potential pathways or actors. One is central government, second is state government. They will do their job. But what happens to us and the institution? We are also responsible to implement parts of the policy. As the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog says, close to 50 plus or 70% of NEP does not need any government order or circular. For example, making learning joyful and discovery based. Do we need a government circular for it? It is something that we are obligated to do, right? For example, so at least at the institutional level and at individual level, what we can think of is something that we can start with. And this organic continuum is very critical for the overarching culture of quality in any institution. Now, I have just put some points here for discussion. I don't want to stretch too much on that. I'll just keep it and read out a couple of them while you read others. If it is not visible, I'm sorry, but I will share the slides. One is, these are some fundamental shifts that NEP is trying to flag, and we all have been discussing on this purpose. So we are able to do that. So moving towards a more holistic undergraduate education is very critical, which all of us have been discussing and being associated with in various sort of levels. Enabling faculty and institutional autonomy. I think you're at the thick of the institutional autonomy and the transitions that you want to plan for the coming years? How are you going to enable faculty autonomy while you have institutional autonomy also, and vice versa? Establishing National Research Foundation. So how will that contribute to quality at large? Because there are some concerns which are evolving with regard to these things in the last few years, that some of the premier institutions will get sort of a biasness in terms of project approvals, or some faculty members who are well known, their proposals get approved very fast, etc. But NRF brings a very interesting model in itself. That is why the draft NEP becomes very important. That is peer-reviewed, transparent, review mechanisms, wherein it will be blind reviewed. They will not know who is applying, from where they're applying. They only know for what they're applying. And there is a mentorship mechanism in terms of, if you can't make it in the first call, and if you miss out on the first, there has to be some mentorship mechanism wherein you will be linked to a senior professor or somebody who is part of that domain as an expert, to guide you and to evolve that particular thinking, and so that you can again apply with those changes. So this is one sort of example. That is the draft NEP, which is aspiring these changes. And as I said, the 66-page document is an extension of the draft document. It's kind of an executive summary of the draft NEP. So I think this is a debate that we should have. How do you really make it happen? This is the aspiration, the policy set forth. But how do you really make it happen? Can we start that within the institution, at the institutional level? Can we start it at individual level, department level, and then slowly build that experience to state and national level? Now, see, quality as a culture has to be aligned to the purpose of higher education. So most often we enter the portals of higher education, you and me as teachers, and our students and administrators and many others in the sector of higher education. But often we have a difference of opinion or thought on the purpose of higher education. So one thinks purpose of higher education is employability. One thinks purpose of higher education is generate new knowledge. One thinks purpose of higher education is to develop or make a good human being, or civic sensitive sort of human being, etc. But let us agree on this 4 things, and then maybe you can also assess yourself to know where is your sort of thinking around how you want to conceptualize quality by yourself. Is quality defined by if you have achieved this purpose, or is it nothing to do with quality? At least that's sort of clarity we should have, and that is what will be very detrimental to the way quality as a culture is going to evolve at an institutional level. But for me, second one is very critical, the one in the red. To increase knowledge and understanding for their own sake, and to foster their application to the benefit of economy and society. Now we are talking about knowledge society, knowledge economy. Now, if we are not able to translate the knowledge that we are contributing to our students into the larger benefit of the economy and society, it could be culture, it could be many other sectors, but economy and society specifically, because that is where the need is today, and that is where the contribution is considered. So if we achieve this, can we say we have achieved quality? First question. Do our existing accreditation, rating and ranking mechanisms measure that? Another question. If both don't do, then how do we develop that culture in our institution so that we are able to achieve, if we agree on this, right? So there are many aspects in this, and I'm not saying this is the only purpose. I'm saying this is an important one among these 4, right? So you can also prioritize them and rank them in order in terms of your approach and interest and the vision that institution has. But at least we should have that, because that's a very important basic parameter to ensure that we all align to the overarching ecosystem and the culture of quality that we are thinking about. Now, the NEP's policy objective also has a cultural component of how institutions should evolve. So one is at a systemic level. It is trying to revamp the higher education system, create world-class multidisciplinary higher education institutions. See, the world-class concept is so misconstrued in many contexts, because some people simply hear the word world-class, they will say, what nonsense are we talking about? Some people, world-class means it's not achievable at all. But here, world-class cannot be something which is standardized. For us, world-class is what we define it as world-class. But as I said, the reputation survey, the perception survey conducted by QS, for example, is a good metric of how one thinks about other institutions across the globe, right? So we have our own perception. We have a perception of Harvard today in our mind. We have a perception of Stanford today in our mind. But tomorrow it might change. given that there is some incident or phenomenon happening. But as an institution, NEP is trying to constantly communicate that it should be localized. It should appreciate the local context, the world classness, because the moment you appreciate the local context, moment you appreciate your local sort of strength of the institution, you are anyways able to contribute to the best or to the world classness for teaching, research, or extension. Then eventually you will develop that perception across the world. I think that is where we'll have to see the difference. It's not top down, it is more bottom up, in the sense each institution defines its own sort of local context. That is why the institutional development plan, IDP, that NEP also refers to, is a very good exercise for testing the level of quality as a culture at your institution, because that's a consultative sort of process. It has to involve all stakeholders as part of the vision of the institution and the overarching outcomes that you envision for 10 years, 15 years. The whole process itself is a good example of quality as a culture in terms of practice, right? Now, what are the challenges? So I will stop at this and then open up for discussion if there are any questions. But since I requested Professor Abha Madam that I need to be relieved to join another, that is the other point which was talked about, continuum. The same chairperson, Dr. K. Kasturirangan sir, is now the chairperson of the National Curriculum Framework, which is another example of continuum. So NEP aspirations are now also reflected in the school curriculum with his chairmanship, continued from NEP to NCF. So we have another discussion on that in another 10-15 minutes. So I'll try my best to capture it in this particular slide and then some of the points and then move on for any quick questions. So there are 10 challenges. Again, these are not my points. This is also there in NEP. I'll not again stress on all the points, but just to give one example. For example, here, a rigid separation of disciplines with early specialization and streaming of students into narrow areas of study. What does it mean? So NEP identified this as a major challenge among all the challenges, in which the draft NEP had a detailed discussion on that in its chapterization, wherein there are two sub issues there. One is as early as 6th or 7th grade, and please, you can connect your own experience or your neighbor's experience. As early as 6th or 7th grade, a child or an adolescent decides that what they want to do, not by virtue of his or her decision, but by some pressure. So very often, not in all cases, but at least 8 out of 10 times it happens. So they decide and they get into that thought process. I will do engineering, I will do this, I will do that, etc. But now NEP acknowledges that it is too early to decide because they have not yet explored what is supposed to be coming in the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th grade, so that they're able to evolve and think through and then take a decision. And because that could lead to underperformance moment they go for, and that also happens, that we have also witnessed in many cases, or that may lead to lack of interest, which is a major barrier for innovation and creativity. So that is early streaming. Second is also, we are ourselves among faculty members, we also have a rigid disciplinary boundaries, that sociology one department, economics another department, language another department, so that structurally we have also created silos. So there are two issues, but of different veracity, but at the same time aligned to higher education related issues, challenges. So NEP makes certain recommendations. What are those recommendations? And there's also an example of reading the policy in that lens. So if these are the two challenges in bullet point number 3, there are certain recommendations. One is in terms of the recommendation of, for example, multiple entry and exit, where the child, if they are victim of this, they are at least able to choose later on. Other is a recommendation that multidisciplinarity must start evolving in the age grade of 8th onwards, so that they're able to make those choices as early as possible, for example. So there are recommendations. So like that, there are many such examples that you can think of. But all of this means we have to be ready for education as a continuum sort of an approach in order to develop that overarching perspective on excellence and quality in an institution. So I'll not stress too much on this now, but I'll stop here. So my perspective for all of you with my little knowledge on this subject matter is always consider quality as a continuum, not as siloed by our work of department level, individual level. It is also to be seen as, and not within the education institution per se, but it is a life experience of a sort. And quality is not something which is exclusive, it is mutually inclusive across various activities that you do. Quality is holistic. It is not about just soft life at hard skills, it is sum total of all the three, and it has to be imbibed into the institutional, academic, and non-academic so-called practices. And quality as a system, not actor-centric. It should not go with one person. It should remain as a system. It should not be like in the 90s or 2000 when Tendulkar is to get out in the match. We used to turn off the TV and wait for some miracle to happen where Srinath and Kumble is to come and win the match for us. It should not be like that. All 11 players should play a role, and all 11 players have an important role. But maybe it's important that we develop the systems perspective of thinking through and not actor driven. And of course, as Professor Dogre sir mentioned, quality, if you really develop that culture, which is not easy and it takes time, and I'm glad that you have already begun that thought process. So it should be learner centric versus not much focused on the particularly institutional centric. It will always happen once you start focusing on the learner, and it will eventually evolve as an institutional practice or ecosystem. With this, I'll stop. There was one hand up by, I think, Professor Nalini Dwarkanath, if I'm not wrong, but I will leave it to hand over to Professor Rama to guide me further on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sangai. It was really a very good lecture what you had given on the NEP, like bringing us, reminding us of what we faced last academic year, bringing NEP into the college. While the institution and various departments faced a lot of challenges in implementing NEP, I also wonder, like, only once a batch of students pass out from this NEP curriculum, we will actually know what are the challenges faced both by the student as well as the faculty. Of course, there are a lot of insights in this NEP policy.
I cannot hear, sorry. Hello? Yeah. There were a lot of reasons you said about students passing out, and then.
Yes, that is, no, I was just telling that only once a batch of students pass out, whether it is the 3 years or the 4-year honors program, we will really know what are the actual challenges faced by the students as well as the faculty from the various streams. Of course, the NEP policy 2020 has brought in a lot of changes, especially not only for the students, but even for the faculty, and more of student-centric learning. It is focused more on student-centric learning than the teacher-centric. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, madam. I agree, definitely. So we'll have to closely watch the first batch, or what you call the NEP batch, to graduate. But maybe I'll use this occasion to have one footnote there to mention that, as Professor said rightly, so I think that this batch is for us a set of empirical data for each teacher to write about how in respective department or in the respective experience of a particular student there or group of students, what has been the evolution in this particular, and this will be great value add for higher education research literature. So while you look into that whole thing, so please do reflect upon it. It's my request, if possible, because each classroom is an empirical data in a way. And when we think about literature on higher education from India, I'm tempted to say no, but I don't want to be very provocative. What I'm going to say now, there is limited India-based research on Indian issues by Indians in India, right? So I think we have a lot of scope to write every day on these issues. So please do, taking a cue from Madam what she said, it'll be great to please document that. And I'm sure I'll be very much happy to read. I'm sure there are many others also willing to read.
Dr. Nalini Dwarkanath, you unmute yourself and turn on your video. You can ask your question. We also request you to introduce yourself.
Ma'am, good morning to everybody. I do not have a question to ask, but only to appreciate the department for having organized such a wonderful program. And both the speakers of today have given excellent lectures, especially the first lectures. His chief guest was very excellent. Just wanted to appreciate. That's the only thing, ma'am. Thank you so much. Hello.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Professor
all
Nalini.
the program, ma'am. Thank you.
We don't have any more questions coming up. I now request.
Rama.
Yes, Maria. One more question.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, morning.
Sir, I'm Harti here from Jyoti Nivas College. I don't have a question, but I would really appreciate you for one point which rather I have never thought of. We normally give orientation for the students, and we usually during the orientation we only tell the students about the facilities that the college offer and the kind of the courses that we are going to learn. But the point which you shared was as the students are coming from school level, they need to get adjusted to the college level of learning, like a kind of transformation happening, because their prescribed books are there to study. But here we give them a number of references. So I think that was a very nice point that on the very first day, I think we should definitely give few ideas to the students regarding this transformation.
Yeah, I think the best, in addition to what you said, madam, the best also sort of domain experts that you have in-house, especially from the Department of Psychology, would also add more value to this whole transition part of it. I'm sure there's a lot of inputs and insights coming from everybody else, but specifically from the domain of psychology. I think it will be very great if they can actually critically engage with during the induction of the orientation program. This is my thought only, but going forward, it has to be multidisciplinary. But at least to start with, we can get some domain expertise from the Department of Psychology or experts from psychology to specifically identify those linkages of or issues of transition. So, okay, madam. So if there are, of course, I'll be always accessible by email. I'll share my slides to you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to respond to them eventually. But can I be relieved from you, Madam Professor Rama?
Yes, just
Yes.
one thing that I wanted to share. One is, thank you. You've given us an opportunity for a reality check. The next thing is your points on institutionalizing culture. Okay, was so relevant, and you brought it down to personalizing culture, where each one takes on the responsibility to work on whatever they are doing, okay, to really promote or look into the factors which would enhance the outcome finally and the beneficiaries. Could you just give us a little bit of an insight of how one can actually personalize quality at the workplace?
Yeah, that's a hard question actually to be because it is so subjective. Moment we say personalizing quality as part of one's practice and culture, it's very subjective because unfortunately we are driven by our disciplinary approach immediately when we talk about our higher education experience. I think undoing that is the first step of getting into this personalization of this experience of quality as a culture. It's very hard. As I said, I can only theorize it or conceptualize it, but it's very hard to practice because we are so much engrossed into that system. Maybe as professor in the first question she raised, maybe this batch when they pass out, maybe they will have that approach of being not so sort of engrossed into the discipline-centric approach towards this. That is one thing I'm thinking aloud. Second is, as I've said, if you have a systems approach, then the whole personal endeavors and the personal experiences will automatically fall into that framework. because very often if we get into that personalized approach, we become very specific to our own experiential insight. But we have to have a transition from experience driven to expertise driven and lead to evidence based approach. And that is where the 3 E's are very critical. So right now, what we are practicing in quality is more experiential driven, partly informed by expertise. But I think that we now have to move towards evidence based, which is going to be very, very important to shift from the subjective approach to objective approach. I think these are all challenges. I'm not saying it is possible or rather impossible, but these are immediate challenges that we have to sort of think through. But I really don't have a perfect pragmatic sort of an answer to that, because this is very difficult. You're right in looking into it. But do we really want that is my other question to you. Do you really want to not to focus on the institutionalization of quality as a culture? And why do you want to focus on personalization of quality as a culture? Because invariably, when we move towards the institutional approach, this will be subsumed into that framework anyways. So, but I understand you see that as a challenge maybe coming through, but this is where you will have to all come together to a systems approach, which I was talking about. And everybody has a role to play in that, but keep the evidence as the reference point is how I would look into it, if I have captured your thought correctly.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was extremely interesting to observe the links between current developments in the education system and different parameters relevant to quality enhancement. We are extremely grateful for this informative and thought-provoking session. We now come to the end of the session. Participants, please note, feedback link has been posted in the chat box. I now invite Dr. Carol Stanley to deliver the word of thanks.
On behalf of our principal, Dr. Sister Lalita Thomas, the management and faculty members, sincere thanks once again to the chief guest, Dr. Yashwanta Dongre, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Chanakya University, Bangalore, and our keynote speaker, Dr. Chetan Sangai, Ramaya University, Bangalore, for the excellent and relevant inputs. And on behalf of all of us here, I thank our principal, Dr. Sister Lalita, for the support and guidance every day, and the smart and inspiring opening remarks today. The organizing committee, steered by Dr. Ramaraju, for their dedicated work. I thank the IQAC team and all those who have contributed in different ways towards this faculty development program. Special thanks to the technical team. Thank you all very much, everyone here and online across the country and globe, for the participation. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.